Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast, featuring tech legend Jake Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Jake Gunkelman, who have we invited to this show today?
A good friend of mine for many years here, Rogene, Dr. Rogene Eichler West. She's kind of stepped back into cognitive neuroscience from more clinical neurofeedback practice and that sort of thing. But she started there too. She's got quite a history of forensic work. We should let her tell her story a bit. We've had Fridays every other week for 2-hour session going over raw EEG since God knows how many years now.
Close to 10.
We've shared a lot of EEG images online, discussed cases. She's an impressive person. I thought she deserved some airtime, and given her unique experience to share that, there may be people in cognitive neuroscience that kind of see a way in based on her experience. Anyway, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Rogene, we saw you last year at the Susan Summit, and for those of you that weren't there, I believe there's a video out there somewhere that you did a segment on AI. Do you want to touch on that? Because this show will appear on the Thursday when we are in Susan City for the 2023 Summit. So do you want to touch on artificial intelligence, what you talked about last year? We can tease everybody to get the video, and then we can go into what you're into now.
Well, sure. Well, first I need to say happy birthday, Jay, because the Susan Summit always is co-occurring with your birthday, and I'm sorry I can't be there this year, but I wish you the best always.
Well, I have to say, we will party hard regardless.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Last year I talked a little bit about the interface, or the intersection rather, between AI and QEEG, mostly because I see that this is an area that I think clinicians are going to hear more and more about. And I think it's good to take a little of the mystery away and to better understand what does this mean? How should I interpret it? Should I trust this? And so trying to explain a little bit, I think I started with the fact that a lot of this AI work was initially intended to be a way of emulating how the brain makes decisions or how it processes information. And then as personal computers made it easy for everyone to build their own neural network, it became more of a tool to do a lot of different sort of pattern recognition work across a number of different fields. And what we're seeing today is things are starting to come a little bit more full circle, where from the brain to AI, we're back to using it to analyze the brain. And what we're finding is that there are, especially this last year, has taken a huge step forward with regards to the kind of AI technologies. Before we were looking at pulling out patterns with something called artificial neural networks, which is this extremely sort of primitive idea of cortex, where you've got a bunch of neurons that are all lined up, and one layer will process information and make decisions and pass it to the next one. And it was very simple in construction. And what we're seeing now is a little bit more of like the ChatGPT. What I find really interesting is that these ChatGPT type transformer technologies and stable diffusion technologies are now being used on volumetric data from the brain. So in the past year, I pulled up 4 different studies, which I would like to emphasize for this whole new next generation of applications. So there has been, let's see, some folks, Tang et al., are now picking up engrams of word sequence from using large language models. So they're picking up what a person intends to say. So we're not just looking at little blips on the surface, but we're looking from MRI, the signal for the word, the context of words that would probably come before or might come after it. So we're not just looking at a single point in time and trying to interpret that, but we're looking at the context of many different areas at once and the relationship to past words, past signals that were just produced, and anticipating what future ones might occur. The scariest, I guess, that I have seen of all of this, and I say the word scary because I've got a YouTube video that I can put into the chat.
St. Louis and here locally at Albany Medical College, teaming up with other scientists and 29 epilepsy patients at Albany Medical Center to better understand the brain.
The human brain is really the last frontier. We know as little about the human brain as we know about the floor of the ocean. It's really an unexplored territory.
The experiment seemed simple enough. The researchers played Pink Floyd's song Another Brick in the Wall for the patients.
All in all was just a brick in the wall.
We were looking for a song that had like all these different components, lyrics, melodies, some silence component in there, some instruments. They suggested that everybody liked it, and I think every single patient and their families really liked it too. So it was a very good choice. I'm quite happy that we actually picked Pink Floyd and not something else from the 80s.
But the reason behind the action, a bit more complex. Bruner and his team able to use the patient's brain signals to recreate the song.
It's allowed us to make significant progress, not just in understanding, but also in the translation of these understandings into therapies, into better diagnostic options, essentially to help patients, with very specific neurological disorders and diseases. And also, in people who have traumatic brain injury and other conditions, we can now better understand why they may perceive the world in a different way.
Bruner says the findings will also help with additional research down the road.
What we're now interested in is understanding how we can perturb this perception, mainly, to alleviate specific conditions where people may not be able to pay enough attention. Maybe they may not be able to memorize auditory information that comes in. So we're interested in deeper brain structures that govern information flow throughout the brain. So we are interested now in the next chapter, which is neuromodulation.
Saying he's glad Pink Floyd's music can be enjoyed by many for more than just the way it sounds.
I think they're just quite happy that their music provides value beyond just entertaining people.
We're using intercortical electrodes, and of course you're going to get a lot cleaner signal when you use that than if you do the messy stuff on the surface from epilepsy patients, and they're able to reconstruct then from these recordings what it was that they were perceiving. And it sounds like something out of Twilight Zone if you listen to the recording, and that's the scary part. I mean, is like, oh man, that's a little creepy. It doesn't really sound like the album, and this is a person's brain reconstructing it.
It does sound sort of like you're underwater listening to it or something, But and if you know the song, you have a better chance of kind of getting it. But it's a crude reconstruction. But it's direct from the cortex, and if that's as crude as you can get coming off the surface, EEG is going to be, more smeared than that. But it's intriguing, and the ability to try to predict is also intriguing. The concept of intention, which precedes movement, and the Bereitschaft's potential, which is a slow cortical potential that precedes the movement. It's the intention. There's an electronegative buildup in the premotor cortex and the motor cortex when you intend to move. and that actually activates or charges up the circuitry that would be used to move. But you can quit intending and never move. But you can watch the intention by looking at the electronegative activity, and it precedes the movement usually by quite a few seconds. They can predict the accuracy of a golf putt with the EEG segment a couple of seconds before they swing. That and if you want to make money, tell somebody you can shave 2 points off their golf game. They'll pay you a few $1,000s easy, So, but they're literally looking at EEG and golfing. Martijn Arns has done some very nice work in that area.
The other advancement that I think is feeding into EEG is G-Tec in, I believe they're in Austria. They have these ultra high density electrodes now. I had a chance, the rep came into town maybe about a month and a half ago, and I had a chance to check them out. Totally drooling, I want one, right? With these high density electrodes, they're now able to pick out from motor cortex, they're able to pick out gestures, right? So before we could play a game in the clinic where we'd have someone think about moving, maybe moving their left or right hand, and we pick up things on the surface. Now they're actually getting sequence of hand gestures from this high density array. So it's still quite limited in that you have to shave their head. There's really no ability to place these. It's almost like a tin foil with embedded contacts. And so it's only going to work on folks who are, I don't know, perhaps in the military. Well, there you go. We can throw that on you.
I can get back to C3 and C4 now, so.
Well, we need the rep to come down and to throw that on you and see what can be determined.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting that normally we don't think of that resolution in terms of interpretability from something measured on the surface. So it's pretty expensive rig. It's like $100,000. So yeah. You're really pretty much invested in the longer term. This isn't going to have something you have in the clinic. This is something that.
What is the name again, Rogene?
G-Tec, the letter G-TEC.
Okay.
Yeah. Really this is Christoph Guger owns the company. He's the head of the company. And this is basically Gert Furtscheller's lab from Graz, Austria, taken into commercial applications. All of the work on marginal cognitive, they've got something that can detect people that are in a locked-in state and do some communication with people in a locked-in state. They're very, very advanced. And their equipment $100,000. Their equipment is not inexpensive, but the quality is astoundingly good. And Christoph is the nicest guy. I've had him over to a couple of EEG meetings, and he has a little booth. But not too many people are play in the same realm. So he was over and enjoyed himself and went skiing and had a good time. So he's been back a couple of times, but he's got a fabulous company, and they have wonderful products. Dry sensor, I think they call it Sahara, dry, of course, So, but the Beagle, which searches for consciousness within people that may be locked in or may be, totally unconscious in a coma. But fabulous technology, and again, every high level application that was worked on in Graz, Austria, at the Technical University under Furtscheller was taken to market.
Dr. West, we saw each other last year at Susan City. You were talking about artificial intelligence, and then the ChatGPT rage hit. Great timing. What have you seen as far as changes because of this popularity of people starting to get more involved in AI? They're touching it, they're feeling it. Have you gotten more requests? What are the changes that you've seen since last year at Suisun City?
That's really, really great question. I'm going to give you 3 different answers for that. And then we can, before I forget, then we can circle back and touch on all of them. One is that we're seeing more brains on a chip, neuromorphic technology. This is a chip I just got last Friday that we're going to be checking out for its ability to do different kinds of detecting different kinds of sensor activity. And the idea is that it's meant to be constructed by something called a liquid state network, which is supposed to emulate cortex. So more hardware implementations of brain-inspired concepts. Let's see. 2, I think we're seeing a lot more work being done to put empathy in chatbots, that we're learning to extract subtle cues of emotion, subtle cues of empathy within the string of words, within the response to words. And there's actually a group at University of Washington who's doing some really, really interesting work. The idea is that it is meant to be a surrogate for some kinds of one-on-one counseling. And there's never a complete surrogate for a human, but there are certain people who might not want to go talk to a person for whatever reasons of safety or that they might feel. And to be able to type something online and to have it respond to them in a way that isn't predictable, like, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way, or just parroting back, right? So there's an art to that. And what they're picking up on is how is it that you read a person? Maybe you're picking up a little bit on their attachment style, the way that they use language, and you're subtly changing the way that the chat is parroting back at you to be a little bit more supportive. And it's definitely getting better and better in its ability to trick you into believing it's actually a human. So that would be 2, the addition of emotion and empathy into the responses that we're getting from these algorithms. The third thing I'm seeing is there is this big boom of everybody who wants to use artificial neural networks now to make predictions about the brain. So we've got a whole lot of EEG data that's now online. And and there are 2 different camps. One, we've got the pure computer scientists who are very excited about BCI. Oh my goodness, these kids are all over Reddit, and how do I get into this field? Questions all the time. And so they'll go and they'll take the data and they'll put it into an algorithm. But the problem that I'm noticing is that they don't understand the problem domain, right? So they're predicting eye blinks and they're predicting EMG. And what I think needs to happen as this matures is a greater conversation between domain experts, clinicians who know how to interpret, and these people that have these wonderful technical skills.
Can I just backtrack a little bit? I was joking about I'm the gremlin of technology today because I was the first to go out and then you, so it's all my fault. But no, just a really interesting point that Rogene made, and it was her second point in terms of the technology trying to emulate humans or humanity. And I like her word, it's trick. Okay, because we are trying to trick our senses, replicating emotion. I was joking about I'm not afraid of losing my job, but it's just there's something really wrong with the premise of caretaking going to a non-human, and the fact that we're not making the space or the time for other people, again, in terms of helping, whether we talk about parenting, whether we talk about caretaking for elders. I mean, these are big areas where AI and tech is coming in. But now that it's coming into to therapy, I think we're at a tipping point and a turning point. And Rogene was starting to say that, well, I'll just lead into where the conversation was going, how youth is so comfortable with this that they don't even realize the switch and bait that's going on.
Well, I think other things that are driving this, first of all, their comfort, right?
Yep.
Secondly, I mean, we have a crisis in this country of access to insurance to cover healthcare. Mm-hmm. And if they're not covered, the idea that they can have a pseudo therapist on their phone anytime 24/7 when they need to talk, and it costs them the amount of the download or maybe a monthly subscription, is very appealing to them. Yeah. So they don't have the same nuance as a human, but for the cost of 2 Starbucks a month, they have something, right? And the other thing that I've heard is it seems as if young people today are much more trauma aware than in previous generations. And for those who have a self-identity that's aligned with having been exposed to some kind of trauma, they tend to be a little bit more resistant to necessarily sharing some of their pain with another human. And if they can work it out first in a neutral way, meaning not with a person, but reflected back at them with a form of technology, they seem to be comforted by, I can say whatever I want, and I don't need to worry about being judged. I don't need to worry about things that probably exist more in their mind than is actually true, the therapeutic alliance.
If I could piggyback that and jump in, I mean, I'm really with you on your second point. The first point, however, is the one that I really want to hold up very, very high, which is they have something, not someone. And in terms of, if we look at what is the purpose of therapy, okay, it's to get you through an event, it's to teach you resilience. It's to let you know you're supported, whether intellectually, mentally, loved, all of these things. It's to help you with self-value. And, when that is coming, quote unquote, from a machine. And, I think Jay is familiar with my writing, especially with mini ones, your attachment becomes to a phone, your attachment becomes to a program, your attachment becomes to technology rather than other humans. So, now we're on the dystopic topic here, but I think we really, really need to hatch this out, like, because you're comfortable, is that what you need? But of course, yeah, the affordability, like who's available? Why do you go to therapy? Because your family is either the cause or they're not available. Same thing with friends, et cetera, et cetera. So of course we're looping.
Mary, let me ask you this. Duty to warn, if you tell a AI therapist that you intend to harm yourself or others, where's the liability for that piece of information being shared, since the machine's going to have a little bit more difficult time discerning whether or not you're being a little bit flippant and like, I hate that person, I want to kill them. Yeah. Or you're really feeling that at a much deeper level.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, 3 twitches of the eye means that this is real, and 2 twitches means, there's my humor. But yeah, I mean, obviously, beyond valid point.
The question everybody's asking, and it really pisses Jay off and Dr. Marie, is people are trying to use this technology to get rid of artifacts, and it's just not there yet. Is that true? And if it is true, will it ever get there? Can we get 500,000 brain scans read to get the knowledge of a Jay Gunkelman? Rogene?
Oh, that's a really
I say not yet. I'm not saying we're not going to get there. I'm saying not yet. And don't jump the freaking gun, right? That's where I get so annoyed. I am not anti-technology, but I always end up talking counter it because we put it on this incredible pedestal and make horrendous errors, whether it's sexism, racism, who's in one category or not. And of course, we loop that right back into artifact. The programs take things out that are so valuable, and conversely keep things in that just, to anybody who has any, okay, I'm going to really nasty, any basic training, it's like, no way, people, that's an eye blink,
Well, there's definitely a lot of publications out there, people trying to do that. But the problem is similar to what is seen in the radio frequency community, which is, there's a big group where I work that is interested in these kinds of problems. That if you've got two different kinds of signal coming from two different radios, someplace out in the wild, it's the physics of how do you actually separate them. And so we can do a lot of mathematical tricks, but Jay, I just want to parrot all the years of training I've received from you, and it's like, record it clean in the first place, and only take out what is absolutely artifact. People going down and selecting all the different components of ICA. So it's interesting. I think that you can't fake your way around physics. So I think sometimes it's the question that we're trying to answer: what kind of artifact are we removing? How high fidelity do we need the signal? What's the end goal? But a lot of good people out there are trying to do that. I think that's how we ended up with independent component analysis. I want to say in the early 90s, the idea of taking principal component analysis and changing the axes a little bit in order to pull out. And actually, independent component analysis is considered a form of machine learning. So it in itself is one of the more successful kinds of AI being applied to artifacts.
And there's a few kinds of ICA as well. I mean, fast ICA is fast, but it's not very good. It finds them serially, one at a time, and then takes them out. Infomax was a big step up because it found them in parallel and maximally separated the components. And you can see that in fast ICA, the bottom components are all just very spotty topographies, but in Infomax, everything's fairly spatially constrained, and you get much better results. And then Amica is just so complicated that if you don't have a supercomputer, it just takes a lot of time. So it's not as, the clinical utility requires it to be able to be run, So, but ICA does a nice job of identifying components, and there are those that whine about it being used for deartifacting. If you just don't deartifact it, take the components that are meaningful EEG that you're going to be interested in and look for the source of that component. And don't argue about deartifacting. The components have meaningful pieces in them. And when we're looking for thalamocortical dysrhythmias, for instance, you can see that in a component. And you'll see a low frequency peak of a slowed alpha linked with a gamma or a high beta. Both those frequencies are in the same topography. So they're linked. They're dancing to the same drummer, or they wouldn't be in the same component. And as such, you can, and when you identify the thalamocortical dysrhythmia, then the location of that ends up telling you whether this is likely tinnitus or pain or movement disorder or a reward deficiency, depression, lack of motivation, anhedonia, addiction, eating disorder, a reward deficiency issue at the anterior cingulate. So, you can use the component analysis to identify these things, and don't even argue about the deartifacting. de-artifact any way you want, but you can take the meaningful component out, and oddly enough, you can feed it back. You right now, what are you feeding back? Well, we're suppressing this frequency, we're training this frequency up, we're suppressing this frequency. Well, you can train a component, and the component is going to be insensitive to other things, like eye blinks and muscle tension and things like that. So, there. I think the ICA in clinical application is still underutilized, but there are those that are starting to. Antonio Martins Murrow, Ph.D. in London Scientific, is his practice for neurofeedback and neuromodulation, not just neurofeedback. And he does component-based feedback, and it does quite nicely with it. So there's a lot of high-end stuff that we need to end up focusing on that are clinically useful that we can adopt.
You talked about high-end stuff, Jay. I'd love to go back, excuse me, a few points and actually take it down a few levels. I've talked about this before. Somebody who's on the floor with clients, not a research component. And I find artifact invaluable, and also leaving it in. So classic is working with kids with ADHD. Artifact is a variable. When your artifact goes down, that tells you something. Last week I was at a dystonia meeting. Okay. Same thing. When your artifact goes down, you're actually affecting something, other movement disorders like Parkinson's, et cetera, et cetera. So, that old joke of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So one is artifact actually as variable. The other, of course, is artifact that we don't quite understand. I mean, that's how I essentially got into this, gosh knows how many years ago, in terms of, a marker that wasn't artifact at all. So, yeah, be careful. But I love artifact. I don't like artifact from cell phones, but all the other artifact.
You can read a lot from it. Reading EEG, sometimes you identify other things. Temporomandibular joint syndrome with a one masser that's just tied down and the other one's not. And they have done yoked studies that ended up teaching people not EEG control, but they had yoked EEG. But they had their own eye movement and muscle fed back to them, so they couldn't pierce the fact that they were in the sham group. But when you teach control over your eye movements, that's frontal lobe eye fields are what you're controlling. And when you learn how to relax and get rid of the muscle, that's again something that you've learned. So they actually got some feedback that was quite useful. And at initial outtake, there was not an easy differentiation between the clinical group and the control group that got these yoked feedbacks. But their feedback wasn't specific. And at 6 month and 1 year follow-up, the clinical group that got specific feedback ended up having a better outcome. Pardon the dog.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up, Jay.
Dog feedback.
That's one thing that I was, there's controlled, and then there's a control and experiment, and then there's yoked, and then there's yoked. They're not the same. They're not the same.
So Rogene, we saw each other last year. We're going to miss you today, as we're in Susan today. We get back together again a year from now. What do you see in your crystal ball? If you could take a rag and wipe it clear, what does the future look like for what you're working on?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Personally, I'm trying to decide, do I answer this more? Where do I see, like, in terms of the evolution? field or just from my own perspective. And I guess I prefer
Answer
not.
like your Chat GPT.
Oh, no, no, no. I don't even know if I could begin to
The future is bright.
give you 3 nicely constructed paragraphs. And
the future is bright with intonation and emotion.
right, exactly. I'll do it in a very positive and empathetic way. I think that just the fact that we've seen 4 transformer type of studies, Chat GPT type of studies, latent diffusion type of studies on MRI, MEG data. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. An area that I would love to apply this to would be on ERPs. Right? So we have something that is not just here's the evolution of signals on the surface of the brain, but here's the response to a time-locked stimulus. And so that's an area that I'm hoping, expecting, wanting to see some papers on in the next couple of years, because that'll give us a little bit more. It's not going to play back Dark Side of the Moon, but I'm hoping that it might give us a little bit more insight into the brain's response to acute events. And it may also help us to solve some of the mathematical issues that require us currently to present a stimulus, say 100, 500 times in order to resolve a signal, in order to resolve the ERP. That presumably using something like a transformer technology is going to have built inside of it a little bit more tolerance to how time-locked these signals are. That's going to require, right now our interpretation is latency based on an average, peak height based on an average. So we're going to need to change a little bit of how it is that we're interacting with ERPs. We're not going to look at just peak and latency, but perhaps there's something else now that could be inferred about this signal if we're looking at the full scope of what happened before, what happened afterwards. In more of a transformer, they call it attention, which is how much the algorithm is paying attention to what happened before and happened afterwards. So I'm not trying to say it's going to solve the grand averaging problem, but I'm saying that I'm expecting that we're going to be able to use these time-lock signals with a different sort of algorithmic interpretation as they start to run it through these transformer algorithms. So that's something that I'm pretty excited to see if that happens.
The neural network dynamics that are controlled by slow cortical potentials, the brain has diffuse areas that have to hook up instantaneously to function, and they have to be created as a network. So they're turned on and off as a network by the slow cortical potentials, turning them on electronegative as active, they're on, and then they go electropositive and turn off that network and turn on a different network. So the network dynamics is actually seen as slow cortical potential, low frequency changes in the EEG that the EEG is riding on. Most people filter it out. Well, when you're looking at the spectra of an individual, sometimes you see the nice alpha peak and everybody's happy with alpha tuning and all that. What's missing? Look to the left side. There is no delta rise, the normal upsweep at the left-hand side of that spectra. If that's missing, there's no neocortical dynamics. So the slow cortical potential waxing and waning is missing, and it'll look like a delta deficit in a database. There's not a delta deficit, for God's sakes. Don't train delta. But you have to activate the neocortical dynamics. So you're not stuck in a default mode. You're not, you need to kick in the salience network to turn on the executive network to, you need that dynamics to have function. And the slow content is something that watching the networks formed and turned on and off is something that's at a low frequency that is usually not looked at with EEG. That's chopped off. But it's exactly that ends up making it all make sense. You have to integrate the oscillatory EEG with the slow cortical potential, infra low, infra slow, however you want to call it. But in Europe, Burbaumer filtered off the EEG and focused on the slow, and the EEG was an artifact. And here in the US, we filtered off the low and looked at the oscillatory EEG. And until both are stacked back together, you can't really understand consciousness and how the brain is working. You can't see intention. You can't actually identify attention without a slow cortical potential. So we've got a lot of integrating to do, and the models. Now, I had a client who had been sent to me, and they had a series of EEGs across a few years, and the person had a really well-defined ischemic area, post-traumatic ischemia. And so there was an easily identifiable transient in this EEG. And they had quite a few of the EEGs in the same person. So they had me mark where all of those were. And then they had an AI scrubbing on that, trying to predict with AI where those were without being blinded to my picks, but they're matched to my picks basically. And their first pass was not very good, but then they talked to me and asked what it was I was seeing. And I described the kinds of things that made the waveforms that I was looking at. And their second pass got a 75% match. And they said, well, we're getting better, a 75% match. And I said, well, what makes you think I didn't make 25% mistake? So but they're getting better at matching patterns, a subtle mid-temporal sharp slow transient that's a non-specific irritative or ischemic process, and focusing on those transients, they're going to end up having better outcomes clinically. So I think it was a good project to kind of fiddle with.
Jay, your comment on they continued to train it and until the accuracy increased, and the idea of is it accurate? Your joke about maybe you were 25% wrong. One of the trends in machine learning, there was a big conference at Princeton about 2 summers ago, because the concern is the number of studies where they will overtrain the AI until it's 100%, but that AI can then not generalize to new types of situations. And how they do this, it's called leakage, because you're leaking the right answer to the machine, and you continue to leak the right answer until it knows every instance of what it's been shown, but it's overtrained to the point where if you give it new something slightly adjacent, so some waveform that not exactly the same shape, but means the same thing, if it hasn't seen that in particular, it's going to miscategorize it. And this is actually right before we had the internet dropout. I was saying that we have the problem with the computer scientists who don't know the domain. One of the issues with folks who are using machine learning in a box is that they will do the same thing, that they'll keep showing examples of their data to the machine. The machine then is like, oh, yes, I've seen every example. I can categorize these perfectly. And then they will go into the literature and they'll say, we've got 100% accuracy, 100% precision. Didn't we do a good job? And it doesn't generalize well to new situations. The problem, I think, for clinicians is they read the literature. It's like you could hack p-values in statistics, right? That the problem is that if you don't have an understanding of, and a critical eye towards how did they train the model, how many instances, what was the split between training, validation, and test, that someone's going to read this and say, well, this paper is better than this paper because they have 100% over here and these people only have 82%. And that's a false assumption to be making about some of these papers. And when I do give talks on AI, I'm supposed to talk to ISNR, I think, in 2 weeks. And that's one of the points that I really want to stress is exciting as this all is. We need to be skeptical over how some of these sleights of hands are, what it really means when we measure how well something does. So I think your point about even the human who is our ground truth, and I think you made this point at Susan last year, using the human as ground truth, we need to keep in mind that there are false negatives and false positives that are embedded within our ground truth as well. And we're simply teaching the machine to make the same mistakes. So that really resonated with me, the point you just made.
Yeah, the magnification of error, as well as I call it AI versus AI, right? And the first AI, of course, stands for artificial intelligence, but the second AI is assisted intelligence. And I think in terms of where we are in history, I think we really need a balance between developing pure AI, meaning that we feed information and coach, and then assisted intelligence, wherein it's still based on, the human takes that information and there's a secondary level of judgment on it. And I think it's even obvious in terms of how I'm explaining now. There's an overlap. The terms are not isolated, but I think that the major issue is we're over eager to give everything to the machine, presuming that the machine will be superior, and absolutely forgetting, and I'm just driving Jay's point home and Rogene's point home, which is assuming that when we put in flawed data, just magically the machine is going to be able to make that better. And I think that's a critical assumption.
Dirk de Ritter had 1,000 people that had tinnitus in a database, and he had the algorithm identify the tinnitus with the thalamocortical dysrhythmia, and it was 100% accurate. Normal versus tinnitus. In walks a Parkinson's patient, and the algorithm says tinnitus. Because they have a thalamocortical dysrhythmia, it's just not in the same spot, which prompted the study that they published with the thalamocortical dysrhythmia in different locations means different things. And, pain, movement disorders, reward deficiency, and tinnitus. And it may not be just limited to, there may be more fine resolution with the anterior midline at some point. And we do have a cognitive and affective divisions of the anterior cingulate. So we may end up with finer resolution in our analysis of that. But, the 100% accuracy was 100% accurate in the circumstance of normal versus, and those are discriminants. The problem with a discriminant is that you're an A or a B. What if you're a C? You're an A or a B to the discriminant, and that's the problem with discriminant analysis. There aren't enough discriminants in order for us to end up properly characterizing everything.
You have to teach the machine the alphabet, not the binary.
Dr. Marie, is it possible to do therapy through text?
My immediate issue is with temporal sequencing. Okay, and one of the issues with text is the arousal. So my initial response is you've got a base problem that you're trying to counter there. Is it possible to support through text? Is it possible to do positive things through text? Sure. But therapy, right now, I would say no. But I'm open. I'm really open. I mean, a lot of the individuals that I am aware of that use this, it makes the arousal worse. It makes the anxiety worse. People do not develop resilience. You're part of the problem, not part of the solution. But I'm open. Ask me 6 months from now. But right
Okay,
now,
I will.
yeah.
So where I'm going with this, kids today, all they do is text. Okay, so they want to communicate through text. So if you have somebody on the other end of the phone that's texting you, and is there a finite amount of answers that you can respond back to a statement? If so, can that be trained? And can you use a chat bot to triage somebody?
Are you ready for my humor?
Yeah.
My answer is yup. Or emoji, the previous generation emoji. Yeah.
Therapy through emoji.
Well, no, that was a joke because currently it's the yup. The half generation between me and youth today. It's this one. I mean, this is dated now. I'm watching this all the time. I have to be very, very cautious. I don't mind overtly sharing what generation I'm in. I'm the last generation on this planet that knows what the world was pre-iTech, meaning my whole developmental cycle was complete. I was, 26-ish and doing my master's when the tech invasion happened in the universities, right? So I have a very interesting perspective, which I hope is not purely resistance. But we also have to consider that I'm a therapist and I'm on the clinical floor. So I see individuals with quote unquote problems. But I've also been pigeonholed in that's an accusation. You don't know because you only see people with issues. But you also have a view on I don't want to say the normative population, but essentially the population that's not in therapy. And I'm just seeing outrageous rates of what I refer to as hyperarousal. I talked about temporal frequency, sequential, the anxiety, the not knowing when you're going to get a response, if it's a positive response, a negative response. We all kind of know that sometimes negative response is more rewarding than positive response. What is this doing at the base level arousal? Well, I can tell you what it's doing. We're all kind of flying at this level and have trouble quieting. So if you're going to suggest to me that we provide therapy to help with the quieting via the exact same method that I believe is responsible for the raise in arousal, we're not thinking too logically here, right? But keeping ties, if you're feeling a little bit lonely, sending a message out, hey, I'm alive, and somebody goes back, yeah, you're alive, I'm glad you're alive. I'm being a bit facetious in terms of my choice of vocabulary here, but yeah, that's all good. Just that touching base. You don't need a full therapy session to feel valued or validated or loved. Sometimes a little heart is all you need, right? So I don't want to minimize that, but if we're talking therapy, not yet.
It's just needed.
There's a rant.
Couple of milk bones will be fine.
For me or the puppy?
All of us. Dr. West, where are you going to be the next couple of weeks? You said ISNR. Anything else coming up on your calendar that we can point people to?
Probably ISNR is the only thing that would be of interest, probably to folks watching this. A lot of what I'm doing, some of it is still brain, some of it is more on the mathy side, and I'd put your listeners to sleep if we went in that direction too far.
I don't know.
ISNR, it's in 2 weeks, and hoping to again bring up the points about being suspicious when you read some of these papers, to let them know what's coming down the road with respect to AI that's meant to be, a surrogate for, or perhaps at some point a complement to traditional therapy. And talk a little bit about how it all got its start with its relation to the brain in the first place, back just a few years after actually Hans Berger and EEG became a thing. It's interesting. It's been around since the 40s was the first time that computational models based on the brain were first introduced. McCulloch and Pitts in like 46 or something. So in some senses, it's not entirely new. It's just that we've got faster computers and that we've spent more time thinking about how to make algorithms efficient. You know, one area that Mary made me think about, an area of AI is called a human in the loop. And it's the idea that you don't train up the machine and then use it with the human, but it's constantly learning and interacting from us. And it also, when Jay was talking about Nils in Germany and locked in slow cortical potentials, this is work that I think came out right at the start of the pandemic. And that is human in the loop. So you have this person who's locked in, you're measuring the electrical activity of their brain, you're interpreting it with respect to the letters that are being shown on the monitor. So the machine learns what the brain does when it sees these letters, but then you want this person to have a higher chance of accuracy. So then you teach the human now, like neurofeedback, you teach them to overexpress whatever that pattern is. And so you're sort of meeting in the middle. The machine learns first, and then you teach the human to exaggerate or to bring more clarity to that signal. And they learn from each other. And in the end, you have a person, I think the first thing he asked for was a beer or something when he was first able to, the first sentence, great, we've been training you up for the past, 6 months or so. And make your first sentence, I'd like a beer. So it's a
hell yeah.
Great.
that situation.
That's what I'm going to say in Sioux Sun City next week, Jay.
Well, we take over the yacht club for our event, and they have a full-service bar, which is a very nice bar in one portion of the building, and we take over the what would normally be a dining hall, and it's set up classroom style with tables and stuff, and it seats 80 people with lots of room, so you don't end up, we don't want a super spreader event, and everybody will be masked. We're being careful. We had it last year, and nobody ended up with transmission within the group. So we'll try to repeat that. But it should be fun. Dirk de Ritter over from actually, I think he might be on his way to New Zealand from Belgium and hopping by this way. Goodness knows he pops.
Well, he's going to be in Tucson like right now. This podcast, it's coming out. He's going to be right there, Jay.
Well, you're going to enjoy him. He's a lot of fun. He's very approachable and extraordinarily knowledgeable. Anyway, I find few people that can go deep in every silo, and he's one of those. So. And then Martijn Arns from the Netherlands, Santiago Bran from Singapore, folks from the U.S. like Ron Swasina. We're going to have a good crew of individuals there. It's getting a little long. I think it's time for a donation to the student fund with an auction off of the beard. I've got kayaks set up for lunch break for 10 people to go with a guide up into the marsh. We're planning as much of a good time in the 3 days as you can squeeze in.
And we joke about the beer, but a good part of the session is not so much what you learn, but the networking that goes on, because everybody does come back to the bar, and we do hold court at the bar, and we meet and greet, and it's a great learning experience. Why am I telling you this now on the day of the summit? Because there'll be a video out that we will have a link that you can check it out. Right, Jay?
Absolutely. the camera handheld in the bar catches lots of interesting interviews.
A lot of editing.
Yeah.
That's why we're wearing masks. That's the real reason we'll be wearing masks, right?
I'll have the Batman mask on. I don't know if you'll be able to tell who I am. Dr. West, how do we send listeners and viewers your way if they want to learn a little bit more about you? Maybe even send some business your way.
Well, I still have my website up at Northwest Neuro Pro. That's where I do. I still do a little bit of consulting outside of my research job. And I would say there's not a lot on there. I should probably update it. There's not a lot there on AI right now. But I would say that folks that are interested in perhaps doing a research study or I don't know, just want to chat about AI in general, and please contact me there, and I'd be happy to give a talk, or I'd be happy to give some consulting advice on what your project is. I mean, what can I say? Brains and math. What's not to love?
We'll put the link right here. Dr. West, Dr. Swingle, J. Gunkelman, thank you for another outstanding NeuroNoodle Network podcast. See you in Tucson.
Actually, Sassoon.
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 Gosh. Now I've learned. Sassoon City. And Sassoon is a word that means west wind. And we expect 80 degrees during the afternoon and 50s at night. So cool evenings, cool mornings, very nice afternoons. So, and partly cloudy, but no rain. So it looks like kind of perfect weather the Chamber of Commerce would be having.
All right. Look out, Chamber. Here we come. We bid you adieu. Thank you, Dr. West.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.